with the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation. And I want to welcome you today to one of our webinars in our series, Global Excellence in Heritage Interpretation, today hosted by Interpretation Canada. The webinar is Bellevue House National Historic Site, a place for conversation. Please put any questions you might have for our speakers in the Q&A bar at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and we'll answer those questions at the end of the talk. Let me pass the screen over to my colleague Jackie Gilson of Interpretation Canada to introduce our speakers today.
There we go. Sorry. I'm now unmuted. Thanks, Chuck. Welcome, everybody. Great to see folks joining from different places and time zones. I'm really glad you could be here for the joint GAHI and Interpretation Canada webinar. I'm joining you as chair of Interpretation Canada from the unceded lands of the Comox Nation in Comox, BC, on Canada's west coast. We have a beautiful sunny day here, and I hope the weather is being good to you too, wherever you are. This topic about conversation feels timely. Many of us are rethinking how we tell stories, who's included, and how we invite visitors into real conversations rather than just sharing information. Today's session is right at the heart of this shift. I'm very happy to introduce Tamara Van Dyke. Tamara is a board member with Interpretation Canada, and I'm thrilled to work with her in that capacity. And she is also the Site and Visitor Experience Manager at Bellevue House in Kingston, Ontario for Parks Canada. She works with her team there, and I think we're going to meet some of them today, to explore new and more inclusive ways of interpreting the story of Sir John A. Macdonald, Canada's first Prime Minister. She brings over 35 years of experience in interpretation, outdoor education, and product development, and a real focus on creating experiences that invite dialogue and multiple perspectives, including Indigenous people's voices. Tamara and team, thank you so much for being here, and over to you. I look forward to your presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Jackie. We do have a number of the team leads joining us today. I'm just going to share my screen and get that all set up, and we'll launch into Bellevue House, a place for conversation. And let me know if we see the screen.
That's good. We see your screen. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Jackie. I'll rely on you for that. Hello, bonjour, Sego, Kwe, and Ani. Today, Bellevue House National Historic Site is a place for conversation where visitors experience, engage, and reflect on the life and complex legacy of Canada's first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald. We'd like to thank all of you for inviting us to join you today as we share the steps that we took through engagement and collaboration to develop the updated exhibits, programs, and visitor experience to provide a place for conversation for visitors to open their hearts and minds, to engage in dialogue with differing viewpoints. I, as Jackie said, I'm Tamara Van Dyke, the Site and Visitor Experience Manager at Bellevue House, and I've been a part of this project since 2020. However, today, joining me are members of the original project team. They started this process over 10 years ago. So Dr. Terry Lynn Brennan is the Indigenous Engagement Consultant, and Hugh Ostrom, the Superintendent of National Historic Sites for Eastern Ontario, and Elizabeth Pilon, the Bellevue House Project Manager. So they will be sharing parts of this project throughout this presentation. Is it changing for you there? There we go. So,
yes,
where are we located? We are located in Kingston, Ontario, Canada. Not sure how many of you have been able to visit Kingston, Ontario, but it was originally designated as the first capital of the United Province of Canada in 1841. It was later replaced by Bytown, as we know as Ottawa today, amidst the rising tensions with the United States in the mid-19th century. Bellevue House in the 1840s was once considered a country estate on the outskirts of town. But today, you will find it is located near the heart of the city, near the mouth of the St. Lawrence River and the shores of Lake Ontario. Bellevue House is one of 171 historic sites administered by Parks Canada across the country. It is a part of the Government of Canada's national system that includes marine conservation areas, urban parks, national parks, and national historic sites. These places represent the rich and natural cultural heritage of Canada and provide opportunities for visitors from across the country and around the world to learn about the diversity of Canada. Bellevue House is one of the oldest and finest examples of an Italianate villa architecture found in Canada. It was also the former home to Canada's first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald. Macdonald was born in Glasgow, Scotland, and immigrated with his family to Kingston in 1820 at the age of 5. He completed his law education at the age of 15 and opened his first law office 5 years later in 1835. He began his career in the politics in 1843 as a member of Kingston's Municipal Council. Today, 24 years later, Macdonald was named first Prime Minister of Canada by Queen Victoria and was elected 6 times. He served in the role for almost 19 years, being the second longest running Prime Minister in Canadian history. Shortly before his death in 1891, Macdonald stated, "A British subject I was born, in a British subject I will die," reflecting his vision of Canada as a Euro-colonial state in North America and as a British society. This unique home was purchased by Parks Canada in 1964 and was restored to create a monument to Macdonald, marking the 100th anniversary of the Confederation of British Colonies into the nation of Canada in 1867. Bellevue House opened for Canada's centennial in 1967, and it had been restored to the original 1840s time period when Macdonald lived in the house with his first wife, Isabella Clark, and their infant son, John Alexander. For nearly 50 years, the historic presented focused primarily on Macdonald's time at Bellevue House, his early life, his achievements, and his life as a member of colonial upper class. Macdonald has been hailed as a great nation builder throughout Canada's history. This is largely for his work in forming Confederation and the national policy that protected rising Canadian businesses from American influence. His government was responsible for building a national railroad that connected Canada sea to sea. This period also saw the introduction of a national police force to police the frontier and a national park service to protect and preserve the natural beauty of the land. The creation of these policies and the country we know today came with a price to Indigenous and racialized communities. To include this history, we needed to expand our engagement. Today, we have shifted away from traditional instructional interpretation to a dialogic approach, one that emphasizes on conversation and shared authority through a range of many voices. We've introduced previously silenced truths to share the untold, complicated portions of Canadian history as they relate to Bellevue House, Macdonald, and Canada. At Bellevue House, we incorporated the history before Bellevue House in a natural way, as part of the story, and not as an add-on or a formal address. The young historians ask visitors to think about the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe people who lived on the land long before settlement, who once traded in the Gattaraquay area, known today as Kingston. We didn't do this overnight, and we didn't do it alone. So I will now turn this over to the leadership team to share the steps we took to expand the historic content and how we have created a place for conversation to interpret one of Canada's controversial and often debated historical figures.
Good day. I'm Hugh. I'm a historic site superintendent, and I'm just going to dive into a little bit of the history here of how we got from where we were to where we are today. Um, as Tamara shared, for 50 years, Bellevue House presented the history of McDonald that we as Canadians all learned in school. It was a Eurocentric, positive, nation building story about a man larger than life who created Canada as a concept from his own mental efforts, his oration, and his lobbying. And in that context, in January 2015, we at Bellevue House celebrated the 200th anniversary of his birth. Prime Minister Stephen Harper visited the site, and the team had created temporary exhibits on the pillars of McDonald's work. Given the public sentiment and perception of McDonald, this event started to bring us to question what we were doing and why. Are we not mandated to protect and present the cultural heritage of Canada? And we felt as a team that there were missing ingredients. Later in 2015, Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission tabled its final report, exposing to the Canadian public what thousands of Indigenous survivors, their families, and communities had already known. And with particular respect to McDonald, the chair of the commission, Chief Justice Murray Sinclair, wrote, "The role that Sir John A. played needs to be placed in counterpoint to the grand things he did. And so we must never be unwilling to recognize that our image of the man has not been made complete at this point in time, but it needs to be made complete." The following year, in 2016, as we started preparations for Canada's sesquicentennial, that's our 150th anniversary, popular movements were sharing a more Indigenous-centered narrative of Canadian history. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report had been widely reported and discussed in the media. The Idle No More movement was making Canadians like myself ask questions about our own history. And the RCMP had presented a report in 2014 on murdered and missing Indigenous women that had led to the creation of a public inquiry. In fact, this date, May 5th, is Red Dress Day, where in Canada we remember to bring awareness and recognize the suffering and plight of those young women and girls. In this context, we were tasked with preparing for our next big celebration, and that was Canada's 150th. Thinking back to Chief Dan George's Lament to Confederation in 1967 and how little had changed since that time, the team took on a visitor center renewal to replace the temporary 2015's exhibits. An entirely internal team developed this new exhibit, identifying Indigenous perspectives, uncomfortable truths, minority rights abuses, and looking to a better future together for Canada. For Canada 150 in 2017, in response to this sentiment, Bellevue House presented an Indigenous curator's Many Voices of Confederation exhibit celebrating Indigenous art and perspectives on Canada's Confederation. The visitor center content was updated to move beyond a traditional narrative of Canadian history by incorporating perspectives from minority communities on subjects ranging from Japanese internment to women's suffrage to the devastation of bison herds and the suppression of Indigenous rights through a number of treaties. These works were well received by the public, but fractured the Parks Canada team that had developed it. Our team is a microcosm of Canada's population, and the end result of the exhibit, although aligning with our goals to broaden interpretation of McDonald, presented unanticipated challenges internally for our team. We knew we needed to continue this work, but we didn't know how. After that successful season in 2017, the winter brought us to a roof repair project that identified structural issues in the historic house. The plaster ceiling condition caused us to close the house to the public for repairs, and the ensuring break in operations gave us the opportunity to completely rethink what we presented in the historic house and how. And our experience of 2016-17 had showed us that we needed to do things differently. Through the next year, securing funding and planning a new project, a coffee date with a local Indigenous consultant started to show us a path forward.
Nyawa, Hugh. And Sego, everyone. Terry Lynn Brennan Yunyets, Gunyika Hagaskure, British, Nadododan, Goweno Gweski, Goweno De Gunyugari of Shwigan Jitteron. So, hello. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this presentation and to continue on from where Hugh just left off. Hugh and I knew one another at that point after working together on a Ontario Museums Association presentation the year before, 2019. And so, as someone who was just embarking on a consulting company after coming out of public service and many years of a variety of private and public positions, we had a lovely coffee date with Elizabeth, who will be coming after me to talk a little bit about the internal organization of what was going on at Bellevue House at the time. And the approach was very respectful in the sense of acknowledging the amount of work I had done in the area on Indigenous engagement and the message that I had been pretty much delivering in the area for a number of years about Indigenous inclusion and taunting the motto, nothing about us without us. To that point, Libby and Hugh and I began a journey. And through that journey, I always did a check-in with them to say that you're probably not going to like what you're going to hear. The truth might not be exactly the Parks Canada approach to things. Are you afraid of that? And neither of them were. And that started this process of which I continue to stay with the team and I'm still associated as a community member with the team. Having that trust, having that openness, that humility that the Bellevue House Parks Canada team showed has created that relationship with me, and it allowed for the relationship with the community because my position was initially to basically call on the community to come together to offer their feedback on how Bellevue House should be reinterpreted. It had been a place where many Indigenous people had never been, never wanted to go. The impact of McDonald here in Kingston in particular is very heavy. As the home of not only City Hall at one point to be the Parliament buildings, we're also the home of many prisons, including the oldest one, the Kingston Penitentiary. And Indigenous peoples have a long and bad history associated with all the institutions of this country. And so as we began the process and asking community members, heritage members, as well as Indigenous members, how they would like to see the rewriting of the house, it was going to be a blank slate. We started off with some very honest questions, such as this one that's in front of you. This is a word cloud of the Indigenous engagement process, where the Indigenous folks who came and participated, this is what they wanted to see done. They wanted to see an inclusive concept based in inclusion, where colonial experiences were challenged, where the truth was something that was going to come out. And if we can flip the slide for me. And so that was one of the other questions that came in a very frank way. What is the most important aspect? What is the hope for folks to see in a new, revitalized, and a reinterpreted Bellevue House? This was an answer that came about not just from the Indigenous community, although these numbers reflect it. These were very similar to the non-Indigenous community, the treaty partners, when they also were told on this particular question. But it did come down to truth. And truth meant that not only did the nothing about us without us motto proceed, it actually then took on a new meaning to embark on sovereignty and self-determination for the Indigenous folks to rewrite their own history in this space. And so from that initial engagement process where we contributed to this reinterpretation beginning, it then burgeoned into what became a hard look at bringing Indigenous voices into the everyday components of what was going to happen in Bellevue House and to help restructure that. Can we go to the next slide, please? Out of my initial first report, these were the 5 recommendations that I came upon. And it was very important for everyone to maintain their humility in this process. I can't tell you how many times I asked some pretty hard questions and asked some pretty scary things, perhaps, to be done with that space. And I never once had anyone from the Bellevue House team challenge me on why it was important and how to make it work. It really was a collaboration of equal minds and of full trust and faith in what we were doing and how we were doing it together. On that note, I'll turn it over to Libby.
Great. Thanks, Terry. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thanks so much. As Terry said, we worked very collaboratively over this project, over this renewal. And really, when we looked at it, as the project started to evolve, it was really clear that collaboration with the community, partners, and stakeholders, and internally with the Parks Canada team was key to this renewal. And as Terry said, we started with some external consultants to help us along the road, started with Terry initially. And through that lovely coffee tea break in the beautiful city of Kingston, she was helping us forge the path to Indigenous collaboration, guidance, engagement, and relationship building. How do we start? How do we do it? So this led us to this initial external engagement by means of a focus group that Terry explained a little bit, the process and the recommendations, which really early started to broaden into a variety of community voices coming to the table, as she said, including Indigenous nations and Kingston Indigenous community members, racialized communities in the Kingston area, other organizations, including the City of Kingston, tourism boards, and the Kingston Historical Society. So that's where we really started. But then we started to expand. We engaged an interpretive planner, Dawn Enrich, which many of you may know, to work with us on the interpretive planning process, including taking us from the initial plan right through to an initial media plan as to what were all the themes and what were all the rooms initially going to look like. So he worked through all of that with us. But as Hugh said as well, we worked with the Parks Canada agency team members. And as many of you know, Parks Canada is quite a large organization. And we worked with many of our internal folks to work on communication and collaboration with experts from our national office, including historians, visitor experience advisors, and communication advisors, and which we planned into another key committee to help us foster communications, briefings across the agency, and develop support in various disciplines to assist us through a complicated content review and also complicated approvals throughout the various stages of the renewal. So that was, in essence, our collaboration that we set out as we started the project. As we dove into the interpretive planning process, of course, one of the first steps in the process was to identify the key goals of this renewal project or this plan at Bellevue House. And the four main goals that were identified with the team working together was to inspire a conscious, self-reflective view of Canada and Confederation, inspire an honest thought and dialogue on the lasting legacies of Sir John A. Macdonald, include all voices, particularly those underrepresented in the past, and to weave Indigenous perspectives throughout the entire narrative in a spirit of reconciliation, and to ensure a diverse and inclusive experience throughout the site, acknowledging that people of different backgrounds engage with historic house museums in a vastly different way. And the last goal that we set out was to increase opportunities to utilize technology in this historic space, which was a difficult task or goal, to connect with modern audiences in non-traditional ways, so interactive, technology advanced, dialogic ways. So we talked a little bit about the engagement, but really the engagement evolved as much as the project itself evolved. When we initially started with Terry, our project charter called for just really these one-off focus group sessions, and that Terry described to us, which were planned early in the process of the winter of 2020. And as many of you will remember, winter of 2020 was not great. That's when COVID hit, exactly the same time when our in-person focus group sessions were planned for. But we pivoted and we stepped back a bit and said, how can we still continue to do this during this COVID period of unknowns? So internally, we piloted some virtual sessions, and they actually turned out really well and gave us enough confidence to move forward to do our external engagement focus groups virtually. And the community rose to that platform, and we actually had more people engage with us virtually than those who had RSVP'd for the in-person sessions. So it was a bit of a win for us on that. And as Terry said, she explained a little bit, she showed us what we heard, some of the recommendations and results that we heard early on in the process. Our engagement then shifted from just those initial focus group sessions to an Indigenous working circle who worked through the interpretive planning process with us. We had 5 sessions planned originally in their terms of reference to work us through the interpretive plan or work us through the grounds, the house, everything, what we were thinking of doing, and listen to them. But at the end of that engagement, it was the circle that recommended that, you know, this was a really good process. They really enjoyed working with us. They wanted to continue. How could their voices be heard? And so at that point, one of the recommendations was to expand and broaden the engagement to a larger community advisory committee with more voices at the table to be included, and whose role was to focus then on inputting into the exhibit materials, the text and media that we were going to select for all the areas, and then also to the reopening event that occurred in May of 2024. So you can see how we shifted throughout the project. We pivoted. It's great when you have a plan, but we had to be flexible enough to listen to what we were hearing throughout the process. And we did do those shifts to get a wider and a broader voice at the table through the planning process. And through our planning process, it was really well identified that we would take a many voices approach throughout the grounds and the exhibit. So the new exhibits and presentation at Bellevue House represented really a new way of sharing history and sharing authority at Parks Canada administered sites. As per the new framework for history and commemoration that came out kind of at the same time that we were starting this planning process in 2019. And that framework does include a many voices perspective on historical events, present a multitude of lived experience, and encourage conversation about Canada's past, present, and future. We took guidance from the principles in the framework, asking for input, sharing authority, sharing the voices throughout our planning process. And this resulted in including voices in interpretive panels throughout the house that have Indigenous perspectives along the grounds of the house when you start your experience, and inside the house on the first floor, there's panels that are very clear with Indigenous art, and it's shown that they're Indigenous perspectives as you as you guide yourself through the thematics of the house. And also, we have many voices throughout the experience that share their voice, as in the guest room on the second floor of the house, we have 9 different voices that share their perspective on either how the impact of McDonald's times or policy affected their communities, or how colonialism affected their community. And that's in the guest room with the room titled "To Be Invited." And you can see one of the voices, one of the people that came forward to work with us through the interpretive planning process, Shannon Oranier, she shares her voice from a Black history perspective of that time period. And we also have another voice shared, an Indigenous youth voice. Her name is Isabella Kulak. Her picture is in the middle picture there, a young girl from the Western provinces who shares her story of how one day she wore a ribbon skirt to school and the impacts of that effect on her, which actually led to then the passing of the National Ribbon Skirt Act and Day that many of you now know is in early January. And she also shows how one voice can make a difference in our world. So a really impactful story that we tell on the second floor of the house. each room, each activity, feedback station, each panel encourages a self-reflective look at Canada's history, our past, our present, our future, and our individual place in that history, and how collectively things bring, collectively visitors can recognize that history that most of us is taught is far from complete. And by reflecting on their own experiences, visitors are encouraged to consider how we learn from the past through a broader range of community voices that have come forward to share their stories, and how to think about the legacy they themselves will leave.
Thank you very much, Libby, Terry, and Hugh for sharing the engagement pieces. It happened over quite a bit of time, and it was very impactful to anyone that was involved throughout those times. So today, the community engagement at Bellevue House continues from the project-specific community advisory committee to the now Bellevue Advisory Committee. So as Terry Lynn mentioned, she still has agreed to work with us and to help guide the site, as many of the volunteers, or sorry, many of the CAC members, community advisory members, have agreed to volunteer to continue the work with us. We turn to them and we seek for guidance, we look for support, we ask for advice in all of the decision making as the visitor experience offers at Bellevue House continue to grow and change or shift with the times. Working with the Bellevue Advisory Committee means that we don't need to make decisions alone on any of the new products or programs or content. It is something we can do with the guidance and help. The Bellevue Advisory Committee helps us to incorporate many voices into the work that we're doing each day and continues to expand the history that we share at the house. So for example, today we have a new sharing series, and this program provides a place for guest speakers to share knowledge and skills with the visitors directly. The Bellevue House Advisory Committee helps us to find speakers and stay connected to the local community as well. So when the visitor arrives at Bellevue House National Historic Site, the Visitor Center will greet them with a bright mural indicating and acknowledging the expanded history they will experience throughout the site. Staff meet each visitor, engage where they're at in their understanding of Canadian history, and then they help them to choose their own experience at the house. Visitors will choose from a self-guided experience where they encounter staff, they interact with the stations that Libby mentioned, they interact with the interpretive media along the way, and they can also select from a few programs that are designed to meet them where they're at and help them to expand their personal understanding of Macdonald. All visitors who enter the home will experience a refurbished 1840s Victorian home that tells the story of the life and legacy of Macdonald. The ground floor shares the historic content of Macdonald's time, woven with the decisions and impacts of the colonial system on Indigenous and racialized communities. Throughout artifacts, videos, and audio, visitors can connect with history in new ways and hear the underrepresented voices along the way with traditional narratives of power and prestige. As the visitors climb the stairs, the story shifts to one of the present. As you heard from Libby, she's talked about the many voices in the guest room that the visitors will experience. So they get this opportunity to listen to modern voices that share historical context, and they bring the work of Macdonald's past decisions to life, and it makes it more relevant in the present. Creating spaces for these many voices, using technology to allow impacted peoples to tell their own stories and sharing that authority over Canada's history is key to sharing perspectives and truth. I'm going to play a short video. It didn't ask me to share my audio, so I'm hoping this will work. And if not, I can read what Yumi experienced. But this visitor came to the house. She attended Unpacking Macdonald. And she brought her young son and his best friend, and she will tell you her story.
We don't get the.
I don't think there's any sound, Tamara, so if you want to share the script.
Shoot. Okay. So Yumi, I had the privilege of guiding her through the house, and she now shares her experience, and I'm so grateful she sent me the text. So she states, I began my career as a student interpreter in 1998 on Parliament Hill in Ottawa. Over more than 25 years ago, I have delivered or coordinated many programs highlighting Sir John A. Macdonald and his legacy. She is a lover of cultural heritage, and she's also visited a lot of heritage home museums. Her experience at Bellevue House in the summer of 2024 was profound. It was the first time that she had ever stood in a heritage home museum and felt seen as someone of Asian descent. And it was the first time she had confronted Macdonald's legacy without having to set aside that part of her identity. It was especially meaningful because she was there with her 14-year-old son and his very best friend. She watched these two young Asian boys sit in Sir John A. Macdonald's house while Amy Go explained the impacts of the Chinese head tax and exclusion act. It was an emotional, powerful moment, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude to Parks Canada for creating the conditions that made that experience possible. So today, we haven't stopped listening and asking for guidance. We still are continuing our work with the Bellevue Advisory Committee, and we're also listening to the feedback that was gathered through a visitor information program or survey program that Parks Canada does at many of their sites. In 2025, we collected the feedback from many of the visitors, and we're still hearing that the shared history found throughout the house allows them to experience a more truthful and overview of Macdonald. They get to engage with the exhibits, and they're invited to reflect on their own experiences. We are also hearing polarizing views on the exhibits and content and the way that we have broadened the story. So as you can see here on the screen, in one statement, they heard, we are using language that is not usually used in a historic site. And then the next visitor wants to learn more about Indigenous perspectives, and another wants less, with more modern politics. These comments are showing us that this is just the start, and we have more work to do to ensure that Bellevue House remains part of the conversation. The visitors today often leave Bellevue House with more questions than answers, and that is intentional. By engaging with the many perspectives, they reflect on assumptions and values and their own responsibility to contribute to Canadian history as well beyond their visit. Bellevue House exemplifies the way dialogic interpretation can help historic sites engage with big, complex narratives without flattening them. Sharing authority deepens understanding, surfaces silenced voices, and invites visitors to participate in the ongoing work of history. And Bellevue House continues to evolve through collaboration, dialogue, and inclusive storytelling. So thank you, merci, Niawan, Miigwech, for inviting us here today to share our story of engagement to create this dialogue. And I invite all of you to come and experience Bellevue House, take part in unpacking Macdonald, and please do not hesitate to email us to continue the conversation. Thank you. So, time for questions.
I think it's cool that Erica's post is the one we used here. Welcome, Erica. Thanks for your great comments.
Okay. So do we have
I'll jump in here with a question.
Okay.
What was your biggest challenge in putting all these pieces together? There's a lot of moving parts, and I can imagine it was pretty complex. What would you say was the or a couple of the biggest challenges? Maybe there wasn't one.
Oh,
I don't
wow.
know. I feel like
Libby or
I feel this is a Libby question. This is a project management question. Come on out, Libby.
Thanks, you guys. I guess there's two one that come to mind really quickly, and the first is when you do get input from external and internal people. Everybody's ideas are great. How do you narrow down? So that was really hard to say yes and no to different ideas and different input. So that was really difficult. And you only have so much room, so much money, how that all factors, how do you get the best product with all the great input. So that was a challenge. The other one would be approvals with a large organization that we are. Approvals and also adding on approvals as well, timely approvals to keep your project moving if you have an end date. So I'd say those are the two that come to mind right off. I don't know if Hugh or Tamara or Terry have any others to add.
I think one of the big ones too, Libby, was taking in all of the feedback. I remember all of that feedback coming back to you throughout the various revisions and finding the way to kind of balance that and respect the feedback, but at the same time come back and have conversations about some of the adjustments or suggestions that were made. I think that was
exactly.
a big.
I don't know how many reviews we went through. You don't want to know the number, but I think one of our reviews had 600 comments that we had to filter through, that the core project team had to filter through and nay, yay, and go through it. So that was pretty difficult. As I said, everybody's input's valuable, so it's hard to do that. That's for sure.
And if I can just kind of jump in there too, it's a great question, Chuck. The challenges certainly were a lot of that time frame that took to create a product that was able to be presented. And for me, some of that frustration really laid in with language, because Indigenous content often has a language that does not necessarily flow with the English language in a way that a lot of the editors really challenged. And so the Indigenous folks from the community, as well as the staff that were supporting us from parks, we had to kind of stick to our guns to say, no, this is how Indigenous people think and say and write. And there was pushback, but I think we won in the end. And so it's about educating everybody on this process and everybody certainly associated with this project, on all around the circle. It was an education for those of us from the community to understand how to present it in a way that could be understood and swallowed in a way that wasn't offensive, and also making a point of sticking to Indigenous ways of being, doing, and knowing.
Thank you, Terry. Yeah, we have a couple of questions. I'm not sure if I'm just going to field a couple. There's if we can share more about the collaborative approach and if it's happening throughout Parks Canada. Erica, we've had wonderful pleasures to meet each other as well, and many sites are looking at this. We've been sharing our lessons learned quite often across the agency with not only Parks Canada sites but other sites. Hugh, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, sure, I can say a little bit. There is one major other project currently going on here, which is Province House in Charlottetown, where they have been doing some of the same things that we were doing here in Kingston at Bellevue House, but on a much larger scale, as that is also like the home of the legislature in PEI. And so that is the full renewal project, whereas I think other sites have been able to tackle this type of work in smaller pieces. And one of the challenges with that is, I think what we find works well at Bellevue House is it's a narrative that's woven throughout the entirety of the story, and there's space for other perspectives in every room. And it takes money and time to do that. And there's a lot of sites that are challenged that way. So they're able to like create a space or a small exhibit, which in some ways gives people the opportunity to engage with it or not. And it doesn't have the same kind of impact as being woven throughout. But there are a lot of sites within the Parks Canada network that are looking at that framework for history of commemoration as a guiding document to help engagement and start to build more inclusive stories.
There's a couple of questions in the chat, but we see Bill has a hand up. Bill, would you like to ask your question? Hi.
You're muted, Bill.
Yeah. You're muted, Bill.
There we go. Sounds good now. Hand up.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for that. You mentioned at the beginning about focus groups, and that due to COVID, I believe they were done digitally. You didn't have people coming together in person. And then you moved on to an Indigenous working circle. And I'm curious how, I'm assuming those are done in person. And how are you doing that in the sense of going out to them, or are you requesting the people to come to you?
Yeah, thanks, Bill, for your question. Unfortunately, we were still in COVID lockdown when we went from the focus groups, because the project was moving so quickly, from focus groups to our Indigenous working circle. And unfortunately, I think we would have done those in person, but we had to do them virtually. And then it wasn't until the working circle finished their work and we expanded to the Community Advisory Committee, which was a larger committee of about 12 people. And again, we were virtual starting those, which was really awkward, this whole virtual world. And then finally, I think it was June of 2022, if anybody correct me on my timelines, that we were able to have our first in-person meeting to meet everybody. And I think we had a draft interpretive plan or a draft interpretive media plan at that point. And we were able to walk the full committee, like from beginning to end, from the visitor center through the grounds into the house, to say, this is what we're thinking of doing at this point of the tour or the experience. What do you think? And that was our first face-to-face with the committee. So like you said, I think we would have rather done the working circle in person, but it was just the times that at least everybody, the working circle ladies, it was 3 ladies in the Kingston community that came forward, that they were willing to do the virtual, and it went really well. And thanks to Terry as well for guiding us through that, because we were pretty scared of doing Zoom meetings, and we were like, nobody's going to come, and how are we going to do Mentimeters? And it just worked so well. So I think we had experienced people guiding us through that process.
Yeah. That kind of answers one of a question a little later, but earlier on, Michaela has asked a question about how we deal with controversy that comes up in the visitors. So this is where at the site, after all the learning and the engagement and the guidance that we had, we were also going through 2021 and 2022, where there was quite a lot of controversy around statues coming down and that sort of thing throughout the community. And at the site, the team, we focused on hiring historians, like young historians, people that are in history programs, so that they kind of come with this historical empathy to help share history, and they come with the passion and the knowledge in order to have conversations around history. So that helped. And then dealing with the controversy is we use dialogue. We use the dialogic approach of asking them questions to find out where they're coming from, A lot of times we have visitors that come that are very passionate about what's happening in the news about McDonald, that we're erasing history, that we're not sharing the complete story. And then we take time to ask the questions. We provide them with intros, and we work hard at showing them why it's important to expand the history, to add Indigenous voices and many voices, to help them understand that the conversations we're having is to help people grow in their knowledge of Canadian history and why controversy even comes up. But it's all about asking questions and using dialogue. And I know, Jackie, you'll be happy to hear that. We put dialogue to work in every encounter with the visitors at Bellevue House. Hope that answers your question, Michaela.
Well, I see a question here from Gareth that I think is probably one that a lot of people have, and that is like the engagement piece with Indigenous communities and building a rapport or finding community members who want to work with you. And Terry Lynn was really instrumental in that for us, because we're the government of Canada. We're really good at talking to other governments. We're not good at talking to individuals in a community and finding individuals in a community who haven't already kind of self-represented and said, I want to talk to you about this. So I think the conversations with Terry and our conversations, our rapport, gave Terry the confidence that I think the team was serious about this. And then we kind of had, for a lack of a better word, street cred with the local community. They were willing to work with us because I think Terry was willing to work with us. And through that, we were able to build a community of people who wanted to continue to work with us. And I think that's the hardest step for us as a government, is to be trusted. Go ahead, Terry. I know you want to say something.
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. That was very well put. I guess the advice I would give for these particular types of questions, and yes, we get them, I get them a lot as well, and through my company, is that it takes a lot of time to build up a trust with your Indigenous community, no matter what. It is not as simple as just putting out a call for people to come, which is right now the default for everybody. Because I'm not surprised you're not getting anybody. You have to take the time to build a relationship with someone who, as Hugh says, has street cred in your community, or work with somebody who who can help build and bridge that for you. It's yeah, folks don't trust government on all levels. I do a lot of that across the country. So I hear a lot of the challenges and the ongoing problems that exist between Indigenous communities, neighbors, uh, uh, you know, um, constituents and their government relations. And so you have to build up those relations uh, through one or two people, and then yeah, expect that it's going to take a couple years to have that type of relationship come up where you can have a number of people who want to work with you. Through those years, you have to be humble enough to listen and not just take people's words without really acting on them either. So it's really becomes a reciprocity process, a reciprocity trust, where I hate the word consultation because it really does imply that you're consulting, you're taking from people without actually doing anything with that knowledge. And so it really does have to work in a way that is respectful and honoring the knowledge that is being shared. Much to the last question about interpretation, this whole process has been going on for 10 years. And so the nature that getting to the point where everyone who works on the site is comfortable in telling the story has somehow been, a part of the journey of understanding the different lenses that have been put on the walls and in the spaces of this house. It's not an easy process. I don't think anybody feels that it was an easy process, but it's been an amazingly rewarding process. And I can't say enough about working with people, and I work with people across the country all the time. I have said this publicly. The group that I worked with at Bellevue House, some of the most amazing, honest, humble people to have worked with, who were really willing to sit back and listen and let the community lead the process and lead the language, lead the interpretation, lead it all. Thank you. Nyawa.
Nyawa goa, Terry. Thank you very much on behalf of all of us. We only have like a minute left, I think. And some of the things in the presentation, we left an email. You can Google Bellevue House and email Bellevue House if you have some questions and you want to dive deeper. I see some questions asking about staff training. Yes, we developed a staff safety strategy. It's something that we're working on actually with other sites to help them, kind of a combination of how park wardens and, different people engage with visitors to help the frontline teams to manage if visitors are aggressive. So we've gone through those days, and I think that captures everything else. If you'd like to email us, but I recognize it's 4:01. I'm not sure if overtime is acceptable. So thank you.
Can I jump in here? Can I jump in,
Sure,
Chuck?
Jackie?
Oh, go ahead.
Sure. Go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Tamara and the team, all of you. Wonderful presentation, amazing information. And I just really appreciate sort of the whole openness and thoughtfulness and the way you're inviting people into these conversations rather than just telling a story. And I want to put in a plug to say that Interpretation Canada's conference coming up this fall is actually in Kingston. And I believe part of our conference will include a trip to Bellevue House. And I've never been there, and I'm super excited to go. And if you're able to join us in Kingston, we'd love to have you come and see Bellevue House for yourself. Thank you again to everybody, Chuck and the Gahi group as well. Much appreciated. That's me. Thanks, Chuck.
Thanks for giving us the opportunity, everyone. Really great to talk about this, and appreciate your attention all.
Well, thank you everyone for coming today. Our panel, Interpretation Canada, Interp Europe. We really appreciate it. Looking forward to the future. There's other future webinars. Feel free to look at our website, www.gahi.online, for information about our next webinar in the series and to register. And again, just a reminder that interpretation is a seed, not a tree. So today we planted more seeds. Thank you all for coming.